My parents paid all their attention to my brothers and didn't notice me. When I inherited $3 million, the parents heard about it and started calling me constantly and trying to sue me. I grew up in a family that never quite felt like home. When my mom remarried, everything changed, and not for the better. My stepfather, John, was a tough man, the kind of guy who believed in old-school discipline and had no problem letting everyone know it. He came into my life when I was 10, and I quickly learned that I wasn't his priority. His biological son, Ryan, from a previous marriage, moved in with us not long after, and that's when things went from bad to worse. Ryan was everything I wasn't: outgoing, athletic, and the golden child in John's eyes. My mom, who used to have all the time in the world for me, suddenly became obsessed with keeping John happy. I noticed how she would laugh at his jokes, even the ones that made me uncomfortable, and how she would quickly defend him if I ever hinted that I wasn't okay with the way things were. It hurt, but I didn't have the courage to say anything. In the beginning, the tension was subtle. Ryan would take my things without asking, but when I tried to get them back, I was the one who got in trouble. John had this way of turning everything around, making it seem like I was being selfish or overreacting. He would say things like, "You need to learn to share, that's what families do." Or, "Why do you always have to make things so difficult?" And my mom, standing silently in the corner, would just nod along, as if agreeing with him was her only option. It got worse as we got older. Ryan was given privileges that I could only dream of. When we both turned 16, John bought him a car. Nothing fancy, but still a car, while I was told to save up for my own if I wanted one. "Life isn't fair," John would say, whenever I asked why things were different for Ryan. And if I ever complained too loudly, I was accused of being ungrateful. They'd remind me how lucky I was to have a roof over my head, to have food on the table. The irony was, I didn't feel lucky at all. One day, something snapped. I'd come home from school to find that Ryan had once again gone through my room, taking a bunch of my stuff: clothes, books, even a few of my school supplies. When I confronted him, things got heated. We ended up yelling at each other, which, of course, brought John into the room. He sided with Ryan without even asking what happened. "You're always starting problems," he said, glaring at me like I was some kind of burden. "If you can't live under my rules, maybe you don't belong here." That night, as I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, I thought about what he said. Maybe I really didn't belong there. The idea of leaving had crossed my mind before, but it always seemed impossible. Where would I go? What would I do? But now, it didn't seem so crazy. I didn't belong in that house, not with them. For the next few months, the tension only got worse. John became more critical, and my mom seemed to grow more distant. Every day felt like walking on eggshells. The smallest mistake, forgetting to take out the trash, not cleaning up fast enough after dinner, would result in lectures that seemed to last forever. I could feel the resentment building inside me, but I wasn't sure how to act on it. One day, after yet another argument where John blamed me for something I didn't even do, I made up my mind. I was done. I couldn't keep living like this. The constant belittling, the favoritism, the feeling that I was never good enough. It had to end. I started looking for a way out. At first, it was just a dream. I'd scroll through apartment listings online, imagining what it would be like to have my own place, where no one could tell me what to do or make me feel like I didn't matter. I even started saving money from my part-time job at the local grocery store. Every dollar I put away felt like a small step towards freedom. Then, one afternoon, I stumbled upon an apartment that was actually within my budget. It wasn't much, just a small studio on the edge of town, but it was enough. I filled out the application that night, heart racing the whole time. A week later, I got the call. I had been approved. Telling my mom was the hardest part. I waited until John and Ryan were out of the house, hoping that maybe if it was just the two of us, she would understand. But as soon as I told her I was moving out, the look on her face said it all. She wasn't happy. "You're leaving?" she asked, like the thought had never even occurred to her. "Where are you going to go? How are you going to afford it?" I tried to explain that I had been saving up, that I had already found a place, but she didn't want to hear it. She kept saying things like, "You're making a mistake, and this is just going to upset John." And there it was, the real reason she was upset. She didn't care about me leaving. She cared about how it would affect her life, her marriage. When John found out, he didn't even try to hide his anger. "So, you think you're too good for us?" he sneered. "Go ahead, then. Let's see how long you last out there on your own." I left 2 weeks later, on a rainy Saturday morning. No one came to see me off. I packed up everything I owned into a couple of garbage bags and an old duffel, loaded it into my car, the one I had finally managed to buy on my own, and drove away without looking back. The first few months in my new place were surreal. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to answer to anyone. No more John, no more Ryan, no more constantly feeling like I was in the way. I could come and go as I pleased, eat what I wanted, and just be myself without fear of judgment. It was liberating, but it was also terrifying. I hadn't realized how much I had come to rely on the structure of my old life, even if it had been toxic. Now, everything was up to me. Rent, groceries, bills, it all fell on my shoulders. There were days when I wasn't sure if I had made the right choice. I missed having someone to talk to, even if it was just to complain. But I reminded myself that I was better off alone than stuck in that house, where I was constantly made to feel small. I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts whenever I could. The apartment wasn't much, but it was mine, and I was determined to keep it. Slowly, I started building a new life. I made friends at work, started going out more, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own happiness. But even as things were getting better, the scars from my old life lingered. I'd catch myself flinching whenever someone raised their voice, expecting to be blamed for something that wasn't my fault. It was hard to shake the feeling that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve the peace I had found. One night, while I was sitting on my small couch, eating takeout and scrolling through my phone, I saw a message from my mom. "Can we talk?" it read. I hadn't heard from her since I left. I stared at the message for a long time, not sure how to feel. Part of me missed her, missed the connection we used to have before John came into our lives. But another part of me was still angry. Angry that she had never stood up for me, that she had let things get so bad. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure if I wanted to open that door again. For now, I was content with the quiet, with the simple life I had built for myself. But the message stayed on my mind, a reminder that no matter how far I ran, the past was never really behind me. Life had finally settled into a comfortable rhythm. It had been a few years since I moved out of my mom and John's house, and I had managed to carve out a life for myself. My small apartment wasn't anything special, but it was mine, and I was proud of what I'd accomplished. I had a steady job, good friends, and I didn't have to deal with John's constant criticism or Ryan's entitled behavior anymore. It wasn't perfect, but it was peace. Then, out of nowhere, my life changed in a way I never could have imagined. I came home from work one evening and found a letter from a law firm in my mailbox. At first, I thought it was junk mail or maybe a mistake, but when I opened it, my jaw nearly hit the floor. The letter informed me that I was the beneficiary of an inheritance from a distant relative, someone I barely even remembered meeting. Apparently, my great-uncle, Robert, who lived across the country and had always been a bit of a recluse, had passed away, leaving me a staggering $3 million. I sat there in shock, reading and rereading the letter. It didn't seem real. I hadn't known Robert well. In fact, I could only vaguely recall meeting him at a family reunion when I was a kid. We hadn't stayed in touch, and I had no idea why he would leave me anything, let alone this massive amount of money. The letter mentioned something about him appreciating my independence and how I had struck out on my own. Apparently, he had followed my life from afar and admired the fact that I hadn't relied on anyone to make it. The next few days were a blur. I contacted the law firm, confirmed that it was all legitimate, and began the process of receiving the inheritance. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. I went from scraping by to having more money than I knew what to do with, practically overnight. But as the reality of the situation sank in, so did the complications. Word about the inheritance spread faster than I could have imagined. I hadn't even told many people, just a couple of close friends, but somehow, it reached my family. That's when the calls started. The first one came from my mom. I hadn't heard much from her since I moved out, aside from the occasional text or holiday greeting. But now, she was suddenly very interested in reconnecting. She called me one evening, her voice all sweetness and concern, asking how I was doing, telling me how much she missed me. I could tell something was off. My mom wasn't exactly the type to reach out like this unless she wanted something. After a few minutes of small talk, she finally brought it up. I heard about Uncle Robert's inheritance, she said, her tone casual, but I could sense the weight behind her words. Yeah, I replied, not really sure how to respond. That's such a blessing, she continued. You've been working so hard for so long, and now this. I'm so happy for you. I waited. I knew there was more coming. You know, she added, things have been a little tight for John and me lately. He's been out of work for a few months, and with the bills piling up, well, I was just thinking, maybe you could help us out a little? There it was. I knew it was coming, but hearing it still stung. I hadn't spoken to John or Ryan in years, and now they wanted my money? I tried to explain that I wasn't even sure what I was going to do with the money yet, that I needed time to figure things out, but my mom wouldn't let it go. She started laying on the guilt, telling me how much they had sacrificed for me, how they had always been there for me when I needed them, which was a stretch, to say the least. When I didn't give in right away, she got defensive. You're being selfish, she snapped. You have more money than you could ever need, and we're struggling just to get by. Don't you think you owe us something after everything we've done for you? I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't heartless, and part of me wanted to help, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they didn't really care about me, just my money. After a few minutes of tense back and forth, I told her I needed time to think about it and hung up. That was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. My stepfather John called, sounding gruff and irritated, like he didn't even want to ask, but felt entitled to it anyway. You know, we could really use some help with the mortgage, he grumbled. It's the least you could do after everything we did for you growing up. Ryan reached out too. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but now he was suddenly trying to act like we were best friends. Hey, man, he said, his voice dripping with fake friendliness. I heard about your big windfall. That's awesome. I've been thinking about starting a business, and with just a little help from you, I could really get it off the ground. It was like the floodgates had opened. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years came out of the woodwork, all with some sob story about why they needed my help. Cousins, aunts, uncles, even people I barely knew were suddenly calling me, asking for a piece of the pie. At first, I tried to be polite, to explain that I wasn't making any decisions yet, but it didn't take long for the requests to turn into demands. People who had never cared about me before were now treating me like I was some kind of walking ATM. It was overwhelming, and I started to feel like I was being suffocated by the pressure. Then things took an even uglier turn. One night, I got a call from my cousin Jess. She and I had never been close. We were always too different. She was the party girl, always getting into trouble, while I was the one who kept my head down and worked hard. Still, I was surprised when she called, sounding frantic and desperate. I need your help, she said, her voice shaking. I'm in trouble. I hesitated. What kind of trouble? I owe some people money, she admitted. Bad people. If I don't pay them back soon, they're going to... I don't know what they're going to do. I could hear the fear in her voice, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. But then I remembered all the other calls, all the other people who had tried to manipulate me, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was just another scam to get my money. I'm sorry, Jess, I said, but I can't just give you money like that. She started crying, begging me to help her. She told me that I was her last hope, that if I didn't give her the money, something terrible would happen to her. I felt torn, but I had learned my lesson by now. People would say anything to get what they wanted, and I couldn't trust anyone, not even family. When I didn't give in, Jess got angry. She started screaming at me, calling me selfish and heartless. You think you're better than the rest of us now, don't you? She yelled. You think just because you got lucky with this inheritance, you don't need your family anymore? I hung up, shaken. I hadn't expected things to get this bad. It was one thing for my mom, John, and Ryan to ask for money. I'd half expected that, but for Jess to call with threats? It was too much. I started to isolate myself, not answering calls, ignoring texts. I didn't want to deal with the constant barrage of requests, the emotional manipulation. But even when I shut them out, the guilt lingered. I felt like I was being torn in two, Part of me wanted to hold on to the money, to use it to secure my future, but another part of me wondered if I was being selfish for not helping my family when they needed it. Things reached a breaking point when my mom showed up at my apartment one day. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks, but there she was, standing at my door with tears in her eyes. "I just want to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I let her in, and we sat down. For a few minutes, she just cried, and I didn't know what to say. Then she started talking about how hard things had been for her and John, how they were struggling to keep their house, how she didn't know what they were going to do. "I'm your mother," she said, looking at me with pleading eyes. "I raised you. I took care of you. Don't you think you owe me something after everything I've done for you?" I felt the familiar weight of guilt settling in, but I pushed it down. I had spent years being manipulated by my family, and I wasn't going to let it happen anymore. "I love you, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I can't just give you money because you're my mother. I need to do what's best for me." She looked at me like I had slapped her. "You've changed," she whispered. "You're not the son I remember." With that, she got up and left, leaving me sitting there in silence. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I knew I had made the right choice, but it didn't make it any easier. In the months that followed, I distanced myself even further from my family. The calls eventually stopped, and the constant demands faded away, but the scars remained. I had learned a hard lesson about trust, about how quickly people could turn on you when money was involved. The inheritance had given me freedom, but it had also cost me something I hadn't expected: my family. After my mother walked out of my apartment, things went quiet for a while. I thought maybe that was the end of it. Maybe everyone had finally accepted that I wasn't going to just hand out money and they would leave me alone. For a few weeks, I was able to breathe again, to go about my life without the constant weight of guilt and manipulation hanging over me. But I should have known better. The peace didn't last long. One afternoon, I received a letter from a lawyer representing my stepfather, John. It was a formal demand for a portion of the inheritance, claiming that he and my mother had a right to some of the money. The letter was filled with legal jargon I didn't fully understand, but the gist was clear. They were prepared to sue me if I didn't do the right thing. I couldn't believe it. My own family was threatening to take me to court over money that wasn't theirs to begin with. It felt like a punch to the gut, and the anger I had been holding back for so long finally boiled over. They had already manipulated me emotionally, but now they were trying to manipulate me legally, and I wasn't going to stand for it. I called a lawyer, a family friend, Ben, who I knew I could trust. I explained the situation, feeling a mix of rage and helplessness as I recounted everything that had happened over the past few months. Ben listened patiently, and when I finished, he told me what I had suspected but was too afraid to admit. They didn't have a legal leg to stand on. "They can't just demand a portion of your inheritance because they want it," he explained. "There's no legal precedent for that. If they file a lawsuit, we can fight it, and we'll win." Hearing that lifted a huge weight off my shoulders, but it didn't make the situation any less infuriating. The fact that my family was willing to go this far, to drag me through the mud for money, was something I couldn't wrap my head around. It felt like betrayal on the deepest level. True to their word, John and my mother went ahead and filed the lawsuit. They claimed that since they had supported me during my upbringing, they were entitled to some of the inheritance. It was laughable, really. I had left their house at 18 and never looked back, paying my own way ever since. But that didn't stop them from trying to spin the narrative in their favor. The lawsuit dragged on for months. It was stressful and exhausting, but Ben reassured me every step of the way that we were in the right. Still, the whole ordeal took a toll on me. The constant legal back and forth, the depositions, the endless paperwork, it was all consuming. And on top of that, I couldn't shake the bitterness I felt toward my family. They had taken something that should have been a blessing, my inheritance, and turned it into a nightmare. But then, something happened that changed everything. One afternoon, Ben called me with an update. He had done some digging into the lawsuit and discovered that there were irregularities in the way John and my mother had filed their claim. In fact, it turned out that their entire case was based on fraudulent documents. They had falsified records, trying to make it look like I owed them money for financial support I had never received. When Ben told me this, I couldn't believe it. I had known my family was manipulative, but I hadn't realized they were willing to go this far. Ben immediately filed a counterclaim, accusing them of attempting to defraud me. When the judge reviewed the evidence, the lawsuit was thrown out, and John and my mother were hit with hefty legal fines for their fraudulent actions. I couldn't believe it. After months of stress and fear, it was finally over. Not only had I won, but they were the ones being punished for their dishonesty. The relief I felt was indescribable. It was like a huge weight had been lifted off my chest. I had spent so long feeling guilty, questioning whether I was doing the right thing by keeping the inheritance to myself. But now I knew without a doubt that I had been right all along. But as much as I wanted to feel triumphant, I couldn't shake the sadness that came with it. My relationship with my mother, my stepfather, and the rest of my family was shattered beyond repair. There was no going back from this. The trust was gone, and I had no intention of ever letting them back into my life. After the lawsuit was over, I decided to focus on rebuilding my life. I realized that I had spent so much time worrying about my family's demands and the legal battle that I hadn't allowed myself to really live. I had been in survival mode for too long, and now it was time to start thriving. One of the first things I did was reach out to my younger half-brother, Josh. Josh was the son of my mom and John, and for a long time, we hadn't been particularly close. He had always been caught in the middle of the family drama, and I hadn't really known how to connect with him. But something about the lawsuit made me realize that I didn't want to lose every connection to my family. Josh and I started talking more, and I was surprised at how much we had in common. He had always been quieter, more introverted, and I realized that in a lot of ways, he had been just as overlooked in the family as I had. He told me about how John had always favored Ryan, and how he had felt like he never really fit in. It was like hearing my own story, but from a different perspective. We started meeting up for coffee, talking about life, and slowly rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of hurt on both sides. But I found that Josh was someone I could trust. He hadn't been involved in the lawsuit or the family's manipulation, and for that, I was grateful. Over time, he became a true friend, not just a half-brother I barely knew. In addition to reconnecting with Josh, I found support in places I hadn't expected. My friends, who had stood by me through the legal battle, became my family in a way that my blood relatives never could. I leaned on them more than ever, realizing that family isn't just about who you're related to, it's about who shows up for you when things get tough. One of my closest friends during this time was Emily, a coworker I had known for a few years. We had always gotten along, but after everything that happened, we grew even closer. Emily was there for me when I needed someone to talk to. When the stress of the lawsuit became too much to handle, she was a constant source of support, and over time, I realized that I had developed feelings for her. At first, I was hesitant to act on those feelings. I had been through so much, and the idea of starting a relationship felt overwhelming. But Emily was patient and understanding, and eventually, I found the courage to take the leap. We started dating, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like things were starting to fall into place. With the lawsuit behind me, my relationship with Josh growing stronger, and Emily by my side, I began to rebuild my life. I finally felt like I was in control again, like the chaos that had consumed my life for so long was starting to fade. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still moments of doubt, moments where the scars from the past threatened to pull me back into old patterns of guilt and anxiety. But I had learned something important. I didn't have to let my family's manipulation define me. I had the power to choose my own path, to surround myself with people who truly cared about me. In the end, the inheritance wasn't about the money. It was about learning to stand up for myself, to set boundaries, and to recognize my own worth. It had been a hard road, filled with more conflict and betrayal than I had ever expected, but it had also led me to the people who truly mattered: Josh, Emily, and my friends who had been there through it all. Life after the lawsuit wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. After the legal battle ended and my life regained a sense of normalcy, I settled into my new routine. My relationship with Josh continued to grow, and Emily and I became inseparable. For the first time in my life, I felt truly supported and understood by those around me. But just as I thought I had left the chaos behind, life had one more twist in store. One day, out of the blue, I received a message from a woman named Rebecca, claiming to be my half-sister. At first, I dismissed it as some kind of scam. But then she sent me a photo of an old letter that my father, the man I had never met, had written before he disappeared from my life when I was a baby. In the letter, he mentioned both me and her by name. I was stunned. I had no idea my father had another child, let alone that I had a half-sister living just a few states away. She explained that she had been looking for me for years and had only recently tracked me down. Her story was compelling, and something in my gut told me it was true. Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her. When we finally sat down face to face, it was like looking into a mirror of a life I could have had. Rebecca had grown up without knowing our father too, but she had pieced together fragments of his past, fragments I had never known existed. We talked for hours, exchanging stories, trying to make sense of the puzzle of our shared family history. It was strange, almost surreal, to learn that while I had been struggling with my own family drama, there had been this whole other part of my family out there, living their own life. As we got to know each other, Rebecca revealed something even more shocking. Our father had also left her a sizable inheritance, one that had been in limbo because she hadn't been able to locate me as the co-beneficiary. I thought I was done with surprises, but there it was, another inheritance, this time tied to the man I never knew. Only this time, it wasn't about the money. It was about reconnecting with a part of my life that had always felt incomplete. Rebecca and I decided to split the inheritance evenly, but more importantly, we agreed to stay in each other's lives. The past had been full of pain and manipulation, but now, for the first time, I had a chance at a real family bond. As the years went on, I found peace in knowing that family doesn't have to be defined by blood or by obligation. It's about the people who choose to stand by you, the people who care for you, without expecting anything in return. My life wasn't perfect, but it was full of genuine connections with Josh, Emily, and now Rebecca. And that was worth more than any amount of money could ever be. Life has a way of surprising you, just when you think you've figured it out. But this time, I was ready for it. After putting the lawsuit behind me and rebuilding my life, I thought I was finally in control. Emily and I were stronger than ever, and my bond with Josh gave me the sense of family I had been missing for years. For a while, everything felt stable. But then, just when I thought my story had reached its calm conclusion, another surprise knocked on my door, literally. It was a private investigator, an older man with a weary face, who claimed he had been hired to find me. At first, I was skeptical, thinking this had something to do with my family or another distant relative trying to dig into my inheritance. But what he told me changed everything. Apparently, during the lawsuit, John had dug deep into my background, hiring this investigator to find anything he could use against me. But in the process, the investigator discovered something else, something John hadn't even known. My father, the man who had left when I was a baby, hadn't simply disappeared. He had been living a few towns away for years, under a new identity, hiding from debts and legal troubles. The investigator handed me a file with my father's new name, address, and a small note he had apparently written years ago but never sent. I've always watched from afar. I'm proud of who you've become. I didn't know how to feel. The man who had abandoned me was suddenly within reach. Should I confront him? Demand answers? Or let the past stay buried? Emily encouraged me to go, and after days of indecision, I made the trip. Standing in front of his small, run-down house, I almost turned back. But then the door opened, and there he was, older, frilier than I'd imagined, but undeniably my father. We sat in silence for a long time before he finally spoke. He told me about his regrets, his mistakes, and how he had watched me grow up from a distance, always too ashamed to reach out. It didn't erase the pain of abandonment, but somehow, hearing his side helped me let go of the anger I had carried for years. In the end, I didn't get the father I had always wished for, but I did get closure. I left his house knowing that I didn't need him to be complete anymore. I had already found my family and the people who truly cared about me. As I drove home, I realized something important. Life is messy and full of unexpected turns, but it's not about who you lose or what's taken from you. It's about the people you choose to keep close and the life you build for yourself, no matter the chaos. For the first time in a long while, I felt free.